Very good morning, students. In this video session we are going to discuss about concurrency control protocol. The main purpose of concurrency control protocol is to generate concurrent execution schedules. Okay, and that too, the concurrent execution schedules should result your database in consistent state. In other words, you can tell like the objective of or the main purpose of concurrency control protocol is to generate serializable schedules. Okay, so everyone aware of what is serializable schedule. Okay, fine. So there are different concurrency control protocols available. So log based protocol, timestamp based protocol, validation based protocol. So first let us discuss about log based protocols. As the name says, in log based protocol, whenever a transaction wants to use a data item, first of all it should log the data item. Say for example, there is a transaction T1 which wants to read the data item A. Before reading A, the transaction T1 should log the data item. Similarly, if a transaction want to write, before that it have to log. So that's a concept of log based protocol. Now the purpose of this lock is that once if a data item is being locked by one transaction, no other transaction can use the data item because already one transaction has locked it. So other transaction have to wait till this transaction unlocks the data item. Now there are two modes of lock. In order to improve the consistency, in order to improve the level of concurrency, there are two modes of lock available. One is shared mode lock and another one is exclusive mode lock. Whenever a transaction wants to read a data item, then the transaction can lock the data item in shared mode. Suppose if a transaction wants to write a data item, or it have to both read and write, whatever it may be, in that case it have to lock the data item in exclusive mode. Okay, so if a transaction locks the data item in shared mode, then the transaction can only read the data item. Similarly, if a transaction have locked the data item in exclusive mode, it can read and also it can write. Okay, fine. Now the main purpose of these two modes is, as I already said, it is used for improving the level of concurrency. Okay, so how the level of concurrency is being improved? See, if a transaction has locked a data item in shared mode, what does it mean? It means that the transaction is just going to read it. If a transaction is just reading a data item, obviously it can allow other transaction also to read it. Okay, so that's the purpose of shared mode. So shared mode, when a data item is being logged in shared mode, other transaction can also log that data item in shared mode. Okay, so that modes what we are referring as compatible modes. Whenever two modes are compatible, then the lock request can be granted. The point I am trying to convey is, if a data item has already been locked by some transaction, now another transaction is requesting for lock for the same data item. Now the requested mode lock and the already locked mode, if the two modes are compatible to each other, then the request will be granted. What I am trying to tell is, T1 has already locked in shared mode. Now T2 is requesting for locking the same data item in shared mode. Now shared mode and shared mode are compatible to each other. So the lock request will be granted. Suppose if the requested mode is not compatible with already locked mode, then it will not be granted. Okay, so the compatible concepts can be clearly understood with the help of this compatibility matrix. You can see that the shared mode and shared mode are compatible. Okay, whereas the other modes, let it be shared mode and exclusive mode, shared mode, or exclusive mode to exclusive mode. So all other modes are not compatible. So whenever the requested mode is not compatible with already locked mode, then the lock will not be granted. Okay, the transaction have to wait till the lock has been unlocked or the lock has been released. Till that the requesting transaction have to wait. Okay. Okay, so hope it is clear for you. So this is what compatibility matrix. Now next we are just going to discuss about a type of locking protocol called two-phase locking protocol. As the name says, it has two phases, growing phase and shrinking phase. Any transaction which follows two-phase locking protocol, first it will be in growing phase, then it will be in shrinking phase, then finally it stops its execution. So when a transaction enters the growing phase, what the transaction can do is it can just obtain the locks whatever it needs. Of course, it can lock the data item only in the two modes whatever we discussed earlier. Okay, either in shared mode or exclusive mode. Based upon the type of operation it is going to do with the data item, it can lock the data item in appropriate modes. So in growing phase, the locks can be obtained, and after performing its operation, then it will be going in shrinking phase. In shrinking phase, what the transaction can do is it can release the locks whatever it has obtained earlier. So in growing phase it can obtain the locks, and in shrinking phase it can release the locks. Okay, and very important point is in growing phase the transaction cannot release the locks, it can only obtain the locks. Similarly, in shrinking phase it can only release the lock and it cannot obtain the locks. So that is what this two-phase locking protocol is. Okay, so this locking protocol, this two-phase locking protocol ensures that it will generate conflict serializable schedules. Okay, fine. Now we can just see an example of a schedule which follows two-phase locking protocol. T5, initially it is in growing phase, then after performing its operation it is coming to shrinking phase. Similarly, T6 it starts with growing phase, then ends with shrinking phase. Similarly, growing phase, shrinking phase. Okay, fine. So that's about your two-phase locking protocol. Now there are few enhancements in the two-phase locking protocol. The first enhancement is two-phase locking protocol with lock conversion. I will explain this enhancement with an example. Okay, now assume that you have a transaction with 100 instructions. Okay, 100 instructions you have in a transaction. Now in the transaction there is a need for the data item A. Okay, so in the first few instructions you are reading A, you are reading the value of A, and only in the end of the transaction you are doing some updation in A. I will repeat the point once again. You have a transaction with 100 instructions, and in that transaction you are dealing with the data item A. Now regarding A, the transaction is reading the value of A and it is using the value of A for the first 90 instructions. Assume that for the first 90 instructions it is just using A, and only in the end of the transaction, that is it may be in 95th line or 96th line, it is doing an updation in A, it is writing A. Now if this is the case, then when you follow two-phase locking protocol, what we will be doing? since we are reading both, we are reading A and also we are writing A, we will be locking the data item A in exclusive mode, right. Now, once if you lock in exclusive mode, what happens? This exclusive mode is not compatible with any other modes, right. So, what other transaction you have to do? Other transaction you have to wait till this transaction completes its operation. So, the level of concurrency is been reduced. Now, to avoid this, what we can do is, since we are reading the value in the beginning and we are updating only at the end, what we can do is, we can lock the data item in shared mode initially, and whenever you are going to update A, whenever you are going to write A, at that time what we can do is, we can convert it into exclusive mode. That is what we are referring as upgrade. We can upgrade the mode. Initially you lock it in shared mode, and then whenever there is a need for you to write the data item, then you can just upgrade the mode. So, upgrade in the sense changing the mode from shared mode to exclusive mode. Okay. So, now when you do so, what happens? Till 90 lines, the data item will be locked only in shared mode. So, if it is locked in shared mode, any other transaction also want to lock the data item in shared mode, then they can lock it and they can use it. So, level of concurrency will be increased. Okay. So, that is what two-phase locking protocol with lock conversion. Now, in this example, you can see T8 is reading A1 and it is reading other data item also, but only in the later stage, only in the last stage, it is doing some updation in A. So, if you lock it in exclusive mode, then no other transaction can use the data item A1. To avoid that, what we can do is, just see here, you can lock the mode in shared mode, and whenever you want to update it, then at that time you can just upgrade the mode. Is it clear? So, this is what lock conversion. Now, the next important point is, your two-phase locking protocol does not ensure freedom from deadlocks. See, whenever you go with locking protocol, obviously there will be a problem of deadlock. Sometimes it may lead to a deadlock situation. Okay. So, in the upcoming slides, we will be discussing about deadlocks and also how to recover from deadlock. That we will be discussing it. Okay. Fine. Now, there are two more versions of two-phase locking protocol. We are going to discuss that now. But before that, we should know two types of schedules. See, in addition to ensuring that we need serializable schedule, we should also ensure that the schedule whatever we are generating is a cascadeless schedule and also a recoverable schedule. Okay. Cascadeless schedule in the sense, assume that you have a schedule with 3 transactions T1, T2, T3. Okay. Now, due to some reason there is a need for you to roll back T3. Now, you are rollbacking T3. Now, T2 is depending on T3. Assume that T2 is depending on T3. Depending in the sense, the result whatever T3 has given, that is read by T2. So, that is what I am referring as depending transaction. Now, since T3 is rollbacking, now T2 should also roll back, because T2 is depending on T3. Now, T2 is also rolled back. Now, assume that T1 is depending on T2. Now, in this case, what you have to do, since T2 is rollbacking, you have to also roll back T1. Like that, because of rollbacking one schedule or one transaction, it leads to a serial of rollbacks. I will repeat the point. Instead of rollbacking, or for the sake of rollbacking one transaction, it makes us to roll back several other transactions. So, this situation is what we are referring as cascading rollbacks. Always we have to ensure that the schedule whatever we are generating does not leads to such cascading rollbacks. So such a schedule is what called as cascadeless schedule. Okay, right. So the next one is a recoverable schedule. A recoverable schedule in the sense, whenever some rollback occurs, okay, say for example, there is two transaction T1 and T2. If you are rollbacking T2, okay, then assume that you are rollbacking T2. Assume that T1 has read the value that is given by T2. Now, if you roll back T2, then you should also roll back T1, right? But if T1 has committed earlier, then what we cannot do? We cannot roll back T1 because it already is committed. So we should not have such schedules. I will repeat the point once again to make it clear. See, your schedule should be always a recoverable schedule. Recoverable in the sense, whenever you roll back some transactions, its dependent transaction should also be rollbacked. Now, in the example, whatever I said, you have two transactions T1 and T2. Now, due to some reason, you are rollbacking T2. Assume that T1 is depending on T2. Now, if you roll back T2, then you have to also roll back T1. Now, before you roll back in T2, if T1 has already committed, then what we cannot do? We cannot roll back T1 because it is already committed. So such schedule is called as non-recoverable schedule. So we should not have such non-recoverable schedules. We should always have only recoverable schedules. Now, to summarize the point what I said, whenever we have a schedule, a concurrent schedule, we should ensure that it is a serializable schedule, it is a cascadeless schedule, it is a recoverable schedule. Okay, fine. Now there are two more versions of locking protocol, two-phase locking protocol, that is strict two-phase locking protocol, another one is rigorous two-phase locking protocol. In strict two-phase locking protocol, what happens is, whenever a transaction locks a data item in exclusive mode, the exclusive mode will be released only at the end of the transaction. See, we already learned that in growing phase locks can be obtained and in the shrinking phase locks can be released. Okay, that is what two-phase locking protocol. But in the version of strict two-phase locking protocol, the locks can be obtained in the growing phase, and in shrinking phase the locks can be released, but the exclusive mode locks can be released only at the end of the transaction. Only at the end of the transaction the exclusive mode locks can be released. Till that it will be holding its exclusive mode locks. The shared mode lock can be released, but exclusive mode lock can be released only at the end of the transaction. So such version is what called as strict two-phase locking protocol, and there is another version called rigorous two-phase locking protocol. It is very stricter than your strict two-phase locking protocol. That's why the term rigorous is used. So what about rigorous two-phase locking protocol? Whatever lock the transaction has obtained, the lock will be released only at the end of the transaction. In our strict, the consent is only for the exclusive mode locks, but whereas in rigorous two-phase locking protocol, both the shared mode lock and also exclusive mode locks will be released only at the end of the transaction. Okay, so these are two versions of two-phase locking protocol, and these protocols will ensure that the schedule whatever that is generated does not leads to cascading rollbacks, and also those schedules are recoverable schedules. Okay, students, fine. Now let us see how these locking concepts are implemented. in our earlier discussion we have learned that whenever a transaction is requesting for locking a data item, when the lock will be granted, if the data item is not being locked by any other transaction, then the requested lock will be granted. Suppose if the data item is been already locked by some data item, then what happens? If the requested mode is compatible with already locked mode, then the lock will be granted. Else, the requesting transaction have to wait. Okay, now how this concept is being implemented? This is being implemented by using this data structure. Okay, probably you can relate this data structure with a hashing data structure, what you have learned in data structures. Okay, for every data item, a particular position in the hash table will be allotted for it. Okay, say for example, for 1912, there is an item called 1912, a data item called 1912, and for this 1912, this is the position that has been allotted for the lock table. Similarly, for data item 14, this is the position allotted. Okay. Now, whenever say for example, a transaction called T23 is requesting for locking the data item 1912. Now, what happens? Now, the data item 1912 will be applied to the hash function, and the hash function will be giving an address. Now, that address will be this address. Now, we can go here, and initially this data item will not be locked by any transaction. So, the lock will be granted. Now, T23 is using this data item. Is it okay? Fine. Now, assume that the same data item is being requested by another transaction called T1 or T11, let it be T11. Okay. Now, what we will be doing? You will be applying the data item to the hash function, and the hash function will be giving the address, the same address. Now, we are going here. Now, this data item is been already locked by T23. It is already been locked by T23. Now, next what you have to do? If it is already been locked, what you have to do? You have to check whether the requested mode is compatible with the locked mode. This T23 already it may be locked in shared mode. Now, if the requested mode is also shared mode, then what happens? Already locked mode and also requested mode, both are compatible. Now, if it is compatible, the data item can also be locked by the transaction T11. Suppose if that mode is not compatible, then the data item have to wait. Now, you can just see here in this image, the data item data item 123 is already been locked by T1, T8. Okay. Now, T2 is also requesting for the same data item, but that mode is not compatible with the already locked mode. So, what happens? The T2 have to wait. Okay. So, this is how the locking concept has been implemented. Okay. So, we have to ensure that whenever we made a transaction to wait, we have to ensure that it does not leads to starvation. Starvation means a situation where a transaction has been made to wait for a long time. Okay. Okay, so we have to ensure that it doesn't happen. Okay, once again we will be detailedly discussing about starvation when we go with the topic deadlock. Okay. Now, next, so far we discussed about two-phase locking protocol and also versions of two-phase locking protocol. That is locking protocol with lock conversion, strict two-phase locking protocol, rigorous two-phase locking protocol we have discussed. So, next we are going to discuss about timestamp based protocol. So, timestamp based protocol, the concept of timestamp based protocol is every transaction will have a timestamp value, and this timestamp value will be in such a way that the older transaction will be having the timestamp value lesser than the new transaction which has started. the timestamp value of the new transaction which have been started. What I am trying to tell is, say for example, T1 started 10 minutes before and T2 is starting now. If so, the timestamp value of T1 will be lesser than the timestamp value of T2. Is it okay? So, in such a way the timestamp will be okay. Hope the point is clear for you. The older transaction will have timestamp value lesser value, and the younger transaction will have the maximum timestamp value or the greater timestamp value. Okay. Now, in addition to this timestamp values, the data item, each data item will be having two timestamp values. Okay, read timestamp value and other one is write timestamp value. Okay, so in addition to the transactions, we discussed that every transaction will have a timestamp value. Now, what is the purpose of the timestamp value? You can identify which transaction has started first and which transaction has started next. That we can identify it by using the timestamp value. Now, in addition to the timestamp value for the transactions, we also have the timestamp value for the data items. We will be having two timestamp values. One is read timestamp value, another one is write timestamp value. And what we will be having in this timestamp values? Say for example, the data item called Q is being accessed by 3 transactions, T1, T2, T3. Now, whichever transaction has a maximum timestamp value, that timestamp value will be the read timestamp value of the particular data item. I will repeat the point once again, students. Assume that you have a data item called Q, and this Q is read by 3 transactions, T1, T2 and T3. Okay. Now, among these 3 transactions, whichever transaction has the greater timestamp value, that value will be the read timestamp value of the data item Q. Similarly, the write timestamp value, okay. So, say for example, the data item Q is written by 3 transactions, T1, T2 and T3. Now, among these 3 transactions, whichever transaction's timestamp value is greater, that will be the write timestamp value of Q. So, ultimately what I am trying to tell is, read timestamp value or write timestamp value, in that you will be having the timestamp value of the transactions which has started newly. Okay. So, whichever transactions performed the read operation with maximum timestamp value, okay, that will be the read timestamp value of the data item. Similarly, whichever transaction has writed the data item with greater timestamp value, that will be the write timestamp value of the particular data item. Okay. Now, with this we can implement the protocol. As I already said, this timestamp value decides the order of execution of the conflicting instructions. Whenever we have a conflicting instructions, then which statement will be executed first, that will be decided by the timestamp value. The least timestamp value, the statement of the least timestamp value, only that statement should be executed first. If T1 started first and T2 started next, then what does it mean? T1 should be executed first, then followed by T2. Okay, so timestamp value decides that. Now, try to understand this point. Whenever a transaction issues a read request, whenever a transaction want to read a data item, in the timestamp based protocol, what happens is, the timestamp value of the particular transaction is being checked with or compared with the write timestamp value of the data item. See, now the thing is, a transaction want to read a data item. if a transaction want to read a data item, the timestamp value of that particular transaction is being compared with the write timestamp value of the data item. Okay, suppose if the timestamp value of the transaction is lesser, okay, if it is lesser, then what does it mean? It means that the transaction wants to read a data item, but unfortunately a transaction which started after this transaction has written that value. So in that case, the read operation is rejected and the requesting transaction is made to roll back. Okay, so if you just spend couple of minutes in go through this concept, definitely be very clear for you. It is not much complicated logic, it is very simple logic. Suppose if the timestamp value of the requesting transaction is greater than or equal to the write timestamp value, then the request is accepted. Okay, the request is accepted and the transaction has been made to read the data item. And once after reading the data item, the R timestamp value of the data item should be updated. Okay, so hope it is clear for you. As I said, just go through this point 2 or 3 times, definitely be very clear for you, right? So the same logic for write operation. So far we discussed about for read operation. So whenever a transaction wants to read a data item, we are comparing with the timestamp value of the requesting transaction with the timestamp value, that is with the write timestamp value of the data item. If it is lesser, you are not accepting the request and you are making the transaction to roll back. Suppose if it is greater than or equal to the write timestamp value of the data item, then you are accepting the request and then you are allowing it to read the data item. Once after reading the data item, you have to update the read timestamp value of the data item. So this process you have to do it for read operation. The same logic for write operation. If a transaction wants to write a data item, then the timestamp value of the data item is compared with the read timestamp value of the data item. Okay. Suppose if it is greater, the read timestamp value of the data item is greater than the timestamp value of that particular transaction, then it means that you are trying to write a value, but a transaction which started after this transaction, that transaction already read that value. Okay, so in that case, we have to roll back the requesting transaction. That is what happens. So the next possibility is, we are just comparing the timestamp value of the requesting transaction with the write timestamp value. Suppose if it is greater, again you should not allow that write operation and you have to roll back the transaction, requesting transaction. Suppose if this two condition gets failed, then obviously you can allow the write operation. Once after allowing the write operation, you have to update the write timestamp value of the particular data item. What you have to update? You have to update the timestamp value of the transaction as the write timestamp value of the data item. Okay, fine. So the next and the last protocol, concurrency control protocol, is validation based protocol. So far we have learned about locking protocol and also we have learned about timestamp based protocol. Next one is validation based protocol. See, in validation based protocol, your transaction will be in 3 phases. Okay. The first phase is read and execution phase. The next one is validation phase, and the lastly write phase. Read and execution phase, validation phase, and write phase. Now, in read and execution phase, what happens is, the transaction is allowed to read the data item and if it want, it can also write the data item, but when it writes, it will be available only its internal memory. Okay, so it will be available only in temporary local variables. The result, whatever it is writing, it will be available only in temporary local variables. So this is what happens in read and execution phase. The next one is validation phase. In validation phase, whatever results it already have in its local variable, okay, whether that results can be updated in the database or not. So that will be checked in this validation phase. Okay, I will repeat once again. See whether the results, whatever it have computed and it is available in the local variable, can be taken to the actual database or not. So that will be validated in this validation phase. Then comes write phase. Once in the second phase, if it gets positive signal, yes, the validation phase has succeeded. Whatever you have in we have in the local variable can be taken to the actual database. Once if it gets a positive signal, then the local variable results can be updated in the database. Suppose if it not get positive signal, then the transaction have to roll back itself. Is it okay? So to summarize, there are three phases. A transaction will start from first phase, then second phase and third phase. In the first phase, read and execution phase, a transaction can read the data values and it can do some manipulation and can compute some results, but these results will be available only in the local variables. Then in second phase, that is validation phase, the transaction will be validating whether the results whatever it have with its local variable can be taken to the database or not. It will be validating it. Okay, whether if it taken, it leads to some inconsistency or not. So that validation will be taken place in the validation phase. Then in the third phase, that is write phase, if it gets a positive signal in the second phase, then whatever results it have in the local variable, it will be taken to the database. Suppose if it gets some negative signals, then the transaction will be rollbacked. Okay, so that's about your validation based protocol. Now let us discuss about deadlock handling. See, whenever we go with especially with the locking protocols, definitely there is a possibility of getting deadlocks. Deadlock. What is deadlock? Probably you might have heard this term earlier. So deadlock is a situation in which there is a circular wait. Now you could see in this image, T1 is waiting for locking a data item which is presently held by T2. Okay, assume that the requesting mode is not compatible with already locked mode. So T1 is waiting for T2 to unlock a data item. Similarly, T2 is in need of a data item presently held by T1. So T2 is also waiting for T1 to unlock the data item. So T1 is waiting for T2 to unlock. Similarly, T2 is waiting for T1 to unlock a data item. So now what happens? There exists a circular wait. This circular wait is what we are calling as deadlock. So whenever a system enters a deadlock, the system will be in halt state. No transaction will be proceeding further. So it will be in halt state. So we should always ensure that our system doesn't enter deadlock state. Okay, fine. Now how we are going to handle the deadlock? There are two approaches for handling the deadlock. One is deadlock prevention and other one is deadlock detection and recovery. In deadlock prevention, we will be doing some extra task, and these extra tasks will ensure that the system will never enter in deadlock situation. Okay. So we will be doing some additional task. This additional task will be ensuring that our system will never enter in deadlock situation. Okay. The next approach is deadlock detection and recovery. In deadlock detection and recovery, what happens is we will be allowing the system to enter the deadlock state, and we will be recovering from the deadlock. So it is not like deadlock prevention. We will be allowing the system to execute in its own. We will be allowing the system to execute in the normal way, and we will be monitoring whether the system has entered deadlock or not. Once if the system has entered in the deadlock, then we will be providing some solution for it. So that is what deadlock detection and recovery. Okay, fine. Now let us detailedly discuss about it. So deadlock prevention. In deadlock prevention, as I already said, we will be doing some additional tasks, and these additional tasks will be ensuring the system will never enter in deadlock situation. One simple approach for one simple approach of deadlock prevention type is, before beginning any transaction, obtain all the logs whatever the transaction is required, and then allow the transaction to execute. If we follow this, definitely the system will never enter in deadlock situation. Assume that the transaction T1, it is needing a data item A, B, C, D. Now before beginning the execution of T1, it should lock the 4 data items A, B, C, D. Only after locking the data item, the transaction will beginning its execution. So like that, if we ensure that any transaction before beginning its execution, it should lock all the data items, then the system will never enter in deadlock state. Okay, so this is a concept of deadlock prevention. Okay, so next one is a deadlock prevention. Okay, now in deadlock prevention, you have one more approach, weight and die scheme. Now what is the concept of weight and die scheme? It is just like your timestamp based protocol in the aspect that every transaction will be having a timestamp value. Now you just look into the diagram. If you look into the diagram, whatever concept I am just going to tell, it will be very clear for you. Assume that T1 started first, T2 next, then T3 next. So T1 started first, followed by T2, then followed by T3. If a data item is, if a transaction is requesting for a data item that is being presently held by another transaction, and if the requesting transaction timestamp value is lesser, then the transaction is allowed to wait. I will repeat the point once again, students. A transaction is requesting for a data item presently held by another transaction. Now in this case, we will be comparing the timestamp value of the already locked transaction and the requested transaction. If the requesting transaction timestamp value is lesser, then it is allowed to wait. Suppose if the requesting transaction timestamp value is greater, then the requesting transaction is made to roll back. Okay, so this is what weight and die scheme. As I already said, if you put your focus on the diagram, the weight and die scheme will be very clear. As I already said, T1, T2, T3, T1 has executed first, then after some time T2 started its execution, then after some time T3 has started execution. Now in this diagram, it is very clear that T1 is requesting for a data item presently held by T2. Since timestamp value of T1 is lesser than T2, it is allowed to wait. Okay. Now just see this side, T3, which has started after T2, so definitely its timestamp value will be greater. So a transaction with timestamp value greater is requesting for a data item presently held by another transaction whose timestamp value is lesser. In that case, we are making the T3 to roll back. So this scheme is what called as wait and die scheme. The next scheme is wound and wait scheme. Okay, the same diagram but with some slight changes. Now this wound and scheme can be called as a preemptive method or preemptive technique. The earlier one can be called as non-preemptive. So what does the term preemptive and non-preemptive refers to? When we say non-preemptive, it means that this protocol or this approach is not going to disturb any executing transaction. Which already a transaction is executing. Now another transaction is requesting for the lock. Now because of your request, it is not going to disturb any other transaction which is already in execution. So such approach is what called as non-preemptive. Whereas this wound and wait scheme is a preemptive scheme or a preemptive technique. So what does it mean? Because of your request, it may disturb an already executing transaction. That is why it is referred as preemptive. Okay, fine. Now let us see with this diagram. Okay, put your focus on the diagram. The same logic is applicable here also. So T1 started first, then followed by T2, then followed by T3. T1 is requesting for a data item which is presently held by another transaction T2. And the timestamp value of T1 found to be lesser. So if the requesting transaction timestamp value is lesser than the already locked transaction, then we are making the locked transaction to roll back. It is going to wound the already locked transaction. Okay, is it clear? So T1 is requesting for a data item presently held by T2. Presently it is locked by another transaction T2. Now we are comparing the timestamp value. When we compare, we found that the requesting transaction's timestamp value is lesser than the already locked transaction. So what we are doing, we are just making T2 to roll back. In other case, suppose if the requesting transaction timestamp value is greater than the already locked transaction, in that case we are making the requesting transactions to wait. Okay, so this is what wound and wait. Okay, see, the only thing what you have to be clear is we have to clear when the transaction will be waiting and when the transaction will be wounding the already existing transaction. So that's right. So this is about deadlock prevention. As I already said, deadlock prevention, we will be doing some steps to ensure that deadlock never enters in your system. If you follow this, deadlock will never enter our system, right? So the next approach is deadlock detection and recovery. In deadlock detection and recovery, we have to follow 3 steps. The first step is we have to maintain all informations. All information in the sense, what are the transactions presently executing and what are the data items they have locked presently, in what modes they have locked. So you have to maintain all that information with you. This is the first step. And second step is, using that information, you have to detect whether deadlock has occurred in the system or not. And the third step, once if you come to a conclusion that deadlock has occurred in your system, then you have to provide some solution to recover from the deadlock. So these are the 3 steps we have to follow. I will repeat the steps once again. The first step is maintain all the informations about the system. What are the transactions presently executing, what are the data items they are using, in what mode they have logged. So maintain all the informations. Second step, using those information, identify whether any deadlock has occurred in your system. In the third step, once if deadlock has occurred, once if you identified that deadlock has occurred in your system, then you have to provide some solution to recover from the deadlock. So these are the 3 steps we will be following in deadlock detection and recovery scheme. or deadlock detection and recovery approach. Okay. Now let us see the detailed procedure for step 2, how to identify whether our system has entered deadlock or not. We can identify this by using a graph called wait for graph. Similarly, we have seen one graph called precedence graph. Okay. So that we have seen in the topic called serializability. Okay. So it is very similar to the wait for graph, which is used for checking whether our system has entered deadlock or not. So this wait for graph is very simple. Every graph is been represented by using set of vertices and edges. Now in the wait for graph, all the transactions presently executing, so all the transactions are being represented as vertexes or vertices. Then if a transaction needs a data item presently held by another transaction, then you will be placing an edge between that transaction to another transaction. Now in the diagram you can see that there is an edge between T17 to T18. So it means that T17 is in need of a data that is being presently held by T18. So whenever a transaction needs a data item presently used by some other transaction, then you will be placing an edge between the two vertices. Okay. Is it clear? Suppose T1 is in need of a data item presently held by T2, then you will be placing an edge between T1 to T2, right? Now like that you will be representing all the transactions as a vertexes and you will be placing the edges appropriately. Once after considering your wait for graph, you have to identify whether there is any cycle in it. If there is a cycle, it means that your system has entered deadlock state. Suppose if there is no cycle, then it means that your system haven't entered deadlock state. Okay. Now in the left side you can see the graph without cycle, but in the right side you can see the graph with cycle. What is my graph with cycle? It means that there exists a cyclic path. There is a cyclic path between T19, 18, 20, right? T19, T18, T20, again T19. So there exists a cyclic path. So once if there exists a cyclic path, it means that the system has entered deadlock state. So now we have discussed the second step, how to identify whether the system has entered deadlock or not. So by using wait for graph, we can identify whether the system has entered deadlock or not. Now with this information, we have to go with third step. Okay. How to recover from the deadlock? See, the only solution to recover from deadlock is, if you just consider this case, now the system has entered deadlock state. Just refer the right hand side image. Now the system has entered deadlock. So the only solution to recover from deadlock is you have to roll back any one transaction involved in the deadlock. Either you have to roll back T18 or you have to roll back T20 or you have to roll back T19. So rollbacking is the only solution. Okay. Right. So even for rollbacking, you have to follow, you can have several approaches. Okay. The first thing is you have to select a victim, which transaction to roll back. In our case, there are 3 transactions involved in this deadlock, T18, T19 and T20. Now which transaction to be chosen as a victim for rollback, that you have to identify it. So while identifying, you can take various factors, okay, like cost of the transaction, the time they have taken for execution. So like that, by using various parameters, you can choose the victim. Okay. See, always ensure that whenever you choose victim, you should ensure that a particular transaction is always chosen as a victim. If you choose a particular transaction always whenever deadlock occurs, then obviously what happens? It leads to starvation. it leads to starvation. So we have to ensure that the starvation doesn't occur. So once after choosing a victim, the next what you can do is you can go for rollback. When we say rollback, either we can go for total rollback or you can go for partial rollback. Okay, either you can completely roll back the transaction or you can roll back to certain extent so that the deadlock has been released. Okay, so either go with total rollback or partial rollback. Okay, the next one is starvation. As I already said, if you choose a particular transaction as a victim always, then what happens? It leads to starvation. How to avoid starvation? You have to also take the number of times the transaction has been chosen as a victim, even that also as a factor. I will explain an example. Assume that there is a transaction called T5, which is very inexpensive transaction. It is not costing much, it is very inexpensive one. Now whenever a deadlock occurs, and in the deadlock state, if this T5 is involved, what happens? Every time you will be choosing T5 as a victim, and every time if you choose T5 as a victim, what happens? T5 will never complete its execution because you are always choosing T5 as a victim. So what happens? This leads to starvation. How to avoid this starvation? In addition to considering cost factor, in addition to considering time factor, you can also consider number of times the transaction has been chosen as a victim, even that also is a factor. So once if you include that, then starvation will never happen. So this is how you can handle the deadlock. Okay students, okay, fine. So next we have a few more topics. Transaction recovery. Whenever a failure occurs, we have to recover from that failure, right? Now how to recover from the failure? There is a very important approach for this. It is what referred as log based recovery. Whenever a failure occurs, we can recover from the failure by using log based recovery approach. It's very simple actually. What we are doing is, whenever we perform a transaction, whenever we execute an instruction, we are also storing an equivalent information in the log file. Whenever I execute a read operation, I will be recording a log information for it. Whenever I perform an arithmetic operation, I will be recording a log information. Like that, whenever I do anything in the database, I will be recording an equivalent information in the log file, and ensure that this log file will be always stored in a consistent storage medium. Okay, fine. Now you can just see here, we have a transaction T0 and T1. Now when you execute these transactions one by one, what happens is that you are also storing an equivalent information in the log file. Now every information in the log file is referred as record, log record. So for every instruction you will be storing an equivalent log record. Now just see here, whenever you execute read A, you are recording this information in the log file, T0 start. So what does it mean? It means that T0 has started its execution. Next what you are doing, you are having an arithmetic expression stating that you are subtracting 50 from A. Now in log record, what you are doing, you are just having an information that T0 A, 1000, 950. So what does it mean? In A you have the initial value 1000, in that you are subtracting the 50 value. So 1000 is a previous value of A and 950 is a new value of B. Okay, then again you are having an updation on B. So what you are doing, you are having an equivalent log record stating that what is the initial value of B and what is the new value of B. Then you are writing B, so T1 commit. So like that, whatever operation you are doing in the database, you are maintaining equivalent information in the log file. Now what is the purpose of this log file? As we already discussed, this log file can be used for recovery purpose. if your database crashes or if some failure occurs, by using this log record, we can recover the information. Okay, so that is what log based recovery. Okay, now we are just ending with the last topic. Okay, so isolation levels. So these isolation levels decides to what extent the transactions are isolated from other transactions. Say for example, you are executing 3 transactions, T1, T2, T3. Now in your database, how these 3 transactions are isolated from each other. So that is being specified by this isolation level. Before proceeding with this isolation level, let us have a clear idea about the 3 types of reads. There is a read called dirty read. Dirty read means reading an uncommitted value. Say for example, T1 is reading a data item that is written by T2, but that item is not a committed value. Are you getting it? T1 is reading a value that is updated by T2, but the fact is T2 is not a committed transaction, still it is in execution. Now this is what we are calling as dirty read. So whenever we have dirty read, obviously it leads to some inconsistent state. Okay, so dirty read means reading uncommitted value. The next one is non-repeatable read. Non-repeatable read means a transaction, it reads a value from the database. When it reads a value from the database, it is getting some value. After some time, again it is reading the same value, but now it is getting a different value. Say for example, first time it reads A, it is getting 1000. After some time, again it is reading the value A, but now it is getting 2000. Okay, so this type of read is what called as a non-repeatable read. Okay, and the next type of read is what called as phantom read. Phantom read means, say for example, a user is retrieving the records from the table. By giving some search conditions, he is just retrieving the records from the table and he is getting some results. Say for example, he is getting 5 rows in the result. Now after that, what happens is another user is inserting some records in the same table, and these records also matches with the conditions that has been given by user 1 earlier. Now in this case, again if user 1 try to retrieve the records, he will be getting the records whatever he got earlier, but also in addition to that, he will be also getting the new records that is being inserted by another user. So such a read is what called as phantom read. Okay, so we should ensure that this type of read doesn't occurs in our system. To some extent, we can accept phantom read and even non-repeatable, but we cannot accept dirty read because it leads to inconsistent state, right? Now these 4 isolation levels will ensure the different type of reads. Okay, so the first one is read uncommitted. This is a very lowest level of isolation. When you say read uncommitted, the isolation level as read uncommitted, then a transaction can read a value that is written by another transaction which is an uncommitted value. Even that is also available for this transaction. A transaction can read an uncommitted value also. So that is what read uncommitted. The next one is read committed. In this read committed, if the isolation level is read committed, then it places a constraint that only committed value can be read by the transactions. Okay. The next one is repeatable read. Repeatable read in a sense, whenever you read the value, you will be getting the same value. This is what I said earlier, right? When I discussed about a non-repeatable read, what I discussed, first time when you read, you are getting a result, but again after some time you are reading the same data item, but you are getting a different value. But when you go with repeatable read, we will not be getting that problem. We will not be getting the non-repeatable read problem. Throughout your transaction, if you read A, you will be getting the same value. Okay, so that is what repeatable read. And the next isolation level is serializable. It is a toppermost isolation level, serializable. So here what happens is, it is equal to an serial schedule. Okay, if a transaction reads some data item or writes some data item, no other transaction can use the data item. Okay, fine. So if you take every database software, it will be having their own default isolation level. If you take Oracle, its default isolation level is read committed. Okay, now you can just see about the various isolation levels. If you take read uncommitted, dirty read is possible, non-repeated read is possible, and also phantom read is also possible. If you take read committed, dirty read is not possible because you are ensuring that only committed values are being read. So dirty read is not possible, but non-repeatable read and phantom read are possible. Okay, but if you go for repeatable read, dirty read is not possible, and also non-repeatable read is also possible, but phantom read is possible. But if you go with serializable, dirty read, non-repeatable read, and also phantom read is also not possible, right? So hope the topic whatever we discussed in this session will be clear for you. We will meet in the next session. Thank you, students. Wish you all the best.